So, okay, so you realized you were basing your whole business on one or two buyers, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, you're just making money for this guy. You guys are cashing checks. When and how did you make the shift from, all right, being a wholesaler to being a buyer and raising capital, doing your own deals and stuff like that? So when you had that realization, what did you change? What actions did you take?
When I first entered, I was already doing creative financing. Like some of my first deals were creative financing deals. I was wholesaling them, but they're still creative financing deals. So I was doing a lot of novations early on. They were called equitable listings when I learned them. I was doing subject twos. I was doing lot splits and doing lease options and just selling them to other people so they can make money. So I was already doing creative financing. The shift that I had later on from like raising money and raising capital is I kind of started off with like 30 grand after, stopped working with business partners and everybody else. I had like 30 grand that I can invest and throw into different deals. So it became of like, what can I do with this 30 grand to kind of grow this portfolio? And I noticed I became limited in how much capital I had, how much resources I had. And I had to learn how to raise more capital. I had to learn how to get more creative, right? With less money down, with less resources, so I can start building my little empire.
What was the time frame?
18 months.
18 months.
Yeah.
So you built a portfolio of rentals, houses, multifamily, up to about 6 million and growing. One of the things that nobody really talks about a lot is like, these types of conversations. We talk about making money, investing in the deals, but being a real estate investor, dealing with tenants and all that stuff, man, there's some wild stories. I know you got some crazy stories. I got some crazy stories. Just as an aside, what's one that comes to mind that made you realize that, now you're on a different side of the fence?
It's different because I invest in the hood. So most of my properties are in the ghetto. Most of the people I deal with are underprivileged, under-resourced, underfunded, understaffed, under everything, right? So a lot of stuff that I get in there is
well, that's kind of full circle too from the low mentality, right?
I think the weirdest thing I ever had happen to me on a deal, being a landlord, is I bought something on 27th and Van Buren. I literally had a lady that would break in every night into my property, coming in inside, like literally take a crap in the living room. The cops would come. Like I got to a point where like the cops would come out and be like, "Hey, she's back again, Ray. What do you want to do?" And I was like, what can you do? Remove her. Then it became, all right, you want to press charges? All right, yes, let's press charges. And I'm like, well, we don't want to do the paperwork. She didn't really steal anything, take anything. She just kind of, pulled out your window. She didn't break a window. She pulled out the window unit, crawled in, and then just did her business.
So you have that situation and you continue to invest in the hood. Yeah. Phoenix is different, right? The hood is a spectrum. What is it about that? You have this situation, probably a bunch of other stuff like that. Why do you stay in that area? That's one of your areas.
That's one of my one of my areas.
Yeah.
Why do I stay in that area?
Yeah. But why do you stay when you say the hood? You keep investing in the lower end properties.
I was reading a book and I learned about a method called the Comedy method. There's two different strategies. There's gentrification, and the opposite of gentrification is the Comedy method.
Commoning. Okay.
Yeah, it's a Comedy method. It's the opposite of gentrification. So gentrification is when you have wealthy people moving to the ghetto area. They're getting a tax write-off to
clean it up,
to start really building it and put Starbuckses and Chick-fil-A's and nice little high-risers in the area. Comedy is when the local people do that before they get the tax write-offs. And they start fixing it because before you get to gentrification, the land value's down. We wholesale. We're always looking for dilapidated properties, right? We're always looking for things that are distressed. You just walk down the hood, everything fits that criteria. So you can throw a rock and land on a motivated seller all day long. So I like the area because the opportunity is vast, it's greater. I can find people with more issues that I can kind of relate to and help them out of their scenario.
And you're investing less overall as far as money, cash into deals and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you came from this place kind of like, low mentality, in jail, no direction. And then you started reading books. You had this mindset shift and, you started becoming an investor. And then when you go back into those areas, you're dealing with people who are from where you came from. So what are the realizations that you have the more that you interact with those people and as you're on the other side of the fence?
All transparency.
Yeah.
These people are fucked up.
Yeah. Well.
And it comes from just a stirring pot of just people just being just messed up.
But
Like,
you learn a
in
lot about the way people think and behave.
I understand it.
Yeah.
I understand, like, to the core of me, I understand why people smoke weed every day. I understand why a person drinks every day. I understand, like, their mentality, because I grew up in that environment. So now that I develop a mindset and an understanding, I can relate, because I'm like, I understand why you're in this position. I can't help you, but I understand why you're there.
What do you learn from that?
It helps me deal with people
Yeah.
and cope
I think real estate.
at the same time. Like, I can cope. If someone breaks into your house, you're pissed, you're mad, you're upset, you're ready to press charges, maybe, hurt somebody. Me, I get it, right? So if a drug addict breaks into my house, there's something I've done to make my house look like you should be breaking into it, right? So I need to change it and maybe
Right.
make it livable,
Right.
where you're not thinking, like, they don't break into houses that have people living in them. They're breaking into vacant houses, so they can kind of get warm. They can kind of, like, I understand those aspects behind it,
Yeah.
and it helps me navigate through the hood areas.
So in a sense, real estate gives you a little bit better understanding of humanity, of the human condition, as well as, for yourself, you're elevating, you're growing, you're building your wealth, you're improving your mindset, but then at the same time, you're dealing with people in a lower mindset that, for me, similar situations, right? It's like driven me to realize, the way certain people behave, certain things that people do, this is a human condition, right? Like, you can be a king or you can be a beggar on the street. You're still human. And so when you have this understanding of, like, you have a deeper sense of compassion, but also a deeper understanding of what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human. Yeah, you have to protect your portfolio. You got to do what you have to do to protect the property, right? But it gives you a deeper understanding of why, for me, ultimately when I started out, it was the concept of, yeah, you provide safe, clean housing for more people. Those are the people you help, people who are, on the way up, who have good credit, who are paying on time, whatever your criteria is. But one of the things that I realized was, and there's so many different types of people, and there's so many different types of behaviors and nuances, and you get into, behavior issues and manipulation, and this goes on at all levels of society, not just the lowest rungs of society, but you look at the highest rungs, you look at the wealthiest people, a lot of them have, mental issues, or they have, this fixation with, lying or manipulating or some sort of behavioral quirk that you have to be able to read and you have to be able to understand in business. So I found in real estate that when you start to have this experience, you're dealing with all sorts of people, you have all these experiences with all these different types of people, you start to learn, in a sense, you become more normal because you see the way that people behave that is erratic or not normal in certain ways. And you start to realize, well, what is normal? Because there is no true normal in humanity, but there's a lot of, like you said, people are really messed up. The more of that you see, the more you realize that, you can help yourself. You can't always help everybody else, but you can always learn from other people's mistakes.
I just had this the other day when I threw an event at one of my properties where I invest at, people call it the war zone if you live in Scottsdale, right? So I have friends who invest in Scottsdale, Tempe. They're like 27th in Indian school, like,
war zone.
Oh, you're in the war zone.
I wouldn't go there.
Right? That's what most people say. Right? But when I took people over there they don't understand the concept of war zone, right? And when they're there, I'm like, listen to the neighborhood, right? We're literally, there's, stuff going on in the neighborhood. I'm like, listen to it. What does it sound like? And they're like, it's peaceful. Kids playing down the street, playing soccer in the middle of the street, right? You got the corn man driving around selling corn, the elote man, right? You got an ice cream truck. I was like, listen just to the sounds of the streets in here, right? I was like, it's not a bad neighborhood. There's no gunshots. There's no gangbangers. Does this look like a war zone, right? Now, I've bought in war zones. This is not a war zone.
Yeah.
But there's people who have a perspective that I see what's going on the news. There's too much stuff going on in that area. It's true. There's stuff going on in that area. Crime is kind of high. But I was like, where I'm at and where I'm investing in, you have nothing but families on this entire street and block that are just trying to live life and maintain. And it just helps me understand, I guess the word I would say is dichotomy, which is the mindset or the perception of how people perceive things.
That is the dichotomy, isn't it? The first million's the hardest, starts to shift your perspective. Then you start to become more aware of that dichotomy, right? I would assert there's a direct correlation between someone's net worth and their mindset. Network and how you grew up and all those things have something to do with it, but you're proof positive that you can come from a place of a bad mindset in a bad situation in life and still become a millionaire.
It's just harder to do.
Absolutely.
The reason why, like you just mentioned, the economy. So, I now live in the hood. I used to not live in the hood. I'm staying in some nice high rises downtown. But I noticed depending on what side of the street you live on, it's a completely different environment. So I might go to Scottsdale. I noticed this when I'm in Scottsdale. When I look left to right, I notice I got One Stop Nutrition, right? I got EOS on the corner, right? I got a bakery on the corner, liquor store, right? And check cashing spot,
Yeah.
right? So I noticed like what is available to you within an immediate distance makes it harder for you, because when you want to go spend money, when you want to go think about things to do for recreation, the only thing available to you is not riding a bike if you live in Scottsdale, but the liquor store.
Right. Yeah, there's this whole other concept when this is actually an economic factor where there are different economies in America. The poverty economy actually exists because you think about it, high interest loans, pawn shops, title loans, all these things where people are getting screwed because they need that short-term fix of cash. That's a whole separate economy. And once you're in that system, it's really hard to get out. It's like having a ton of credit card debt that's high interest. How do you get out of that without having some alternative? And so that's kind of the system that becomes self-perpetuating when you're in an area that supports the poverty economy, is what I call it, because they're separate economies. There's also the ultra wealthy luxury economy, right? People buying multi-million-dollar Rolexes and Lamborghinis and Ferraris. That's a whole different economy, right? These are two different economies. And then you have kind of like the standard economy, which is like the average person is in this, fight to stay out of the lower class, to get out of the middle class into the upper class, but that's still the core economy. Right? But these different economic factors and systems exist together. And that's something that's visible.
That's why I do creative financing. It's probably the easiest hack to get out of one economy to the next, because you can actually buy real estate with no money down. You can buy real estate with poor credit. You can buy real estate with no resources whatsoever.
And that can change somebody's life
drastically.
Well, Ray, on that note, there's a ton of other stuff we can get into at other points in time, but for now, I think this is a great intro. Where can people follow you?
You can follow me at Ray_Spencer the Banker on IG and Facebook.
Yep. And then follow Legendary Life Media. This will be on our YouTube channel. And you'll be starting a podcast under Legendary Life Media at some point in the real estate niche to go into all those details, things like that. So stay tuned, stay following Legendary Life Media, follow Ray, and I guess we'll get back to you next time.